recording. You just hit OK. Do that too. Okay. So I'm pleased to introduce Doris Leicher, our guest speaker this evening. Doris is a certified modern psychoanalyst. She's a graduate of PSP. She has a long history with us, and we're so happy to see her back again. She's a graduate of Bryn Mawr College as well. And though she's retired from clinical practice, she continues to do research and teach with the China American Psychoanalytic Alliance. And she also publishes with the International Psychohistorical Association. And tonight she'll be presenting on the topic of psychohistory and its correlation with modern psychoanalysis. Welcome, Doris.
Okay, thank you very much. And my apologies. I was not able to get this link working on my computer, so I'm working from my phone. And if all of a sudden I seem to shift and turn, it's just that in the excitement, I moved my phone.
No problem.
I have been involved with psychohistory since close to my certification because I used some psychohistorical research in my dissertation about patient fees. So psychohistory is a new science which draws from history, psychoanalysis, anthropology, and sociology. And it was founded by Lloyd de Mause in the 70s. He did not have a scientific background, but experience with an abusive parent, and it got him interested in the questions psychohistory has tried to understand since. And the central theme of psychohistory is the idea that adult behavior, especially culture and politics, and our attitudes to culture and politics, are influenced by the parenting techniques and that we experienced as children. De Mause also had the theory that there was a gradual and persistent change in parenting, child rearing throughout history, and that in early history, very often children would be killed, but that now a more helpful parenting style is more prevalent. De Mause's history in child rearing and how it affects political attitudes. And originally, the research went back to Adorno and Horkheimer with their discovery of and discussion of the authoritarian personality. So the interest in studying those dynamics led to a number of specialization. One is the study of childhood and healthy education. And one of the things, for instance, that was discussed and found out in that context was that trauma of the parents can be transmitted intergenerationally to the children, usually through unconscious processes. So it's like really the gift that keeps on giving. Another area was psychobiography, where people study the developmental facts of political or culturally significant people to see if there's a correlation with what they, as far as we know, what they have experienced and their present views and actions. Then there's also group psychohistory, which is the study of groups that seem to be united by similar child rearing practices, and then very often also have a common attitudes later on as adults. And psychohistory often refers to them as psychoclasses because they're united by being reared in similar ways. De Mause also had the idea that art, in particular cartoons, but also movies or things of a similar nature, were the expressions of underlying group fantasies that, as far as he could tell, the psychoclasses had. So, and he felt that a lot of times, depending on what was going on, he could see a number of art pieces of art that may have seemed different on the surface, but that underneath he felt were expressions were dealing with a similar dynamic, similar to how as psychoanalysts we distinguish between the overt content of a dream and the latent content of a dream. And I saw some of the illustrations and examples that he used. Not everything was convincing to me, but a lot of it really was. And all those areas of focus, which to some extent took off under different people and with different momentum, but they're still all united by the interest in understanding how violent attitudes can be fostered, but also how they can be unlearned or at least contained. So it's a very therapeutic science, which is trying to make life better for children and then hopefully for everybody else as those children grow up. Now, are there any questions about that? Okay. Like anything, especially anything new, psychohistory has met with a lot of criticism, and I'll review some of them. Some, I believe, have more merit, others don't. The first one is that psychohistory is not really a science. That it's really a specialization of a subfield of the older disciplines it's coming from. And I don't find that a very convincing argument, because if you look at sciences all over the place, even sciences that are very well established now, we'll see that at one point they developed, usually in the end, out of philosophy, because that was the first attempt to understand how we know things, and then different special questions developed out of that. And as the sciences developed, it was a gradual process with new ideas only slowly getting momentum. And I think even though psychohistory is interdisciplinary, it has its own focus, and it's also inspiring its own research. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But immediately, the inclusion of psychoanalysis as a very foundational building block in psychohistory is unique, and I think it's a good reason to consider the separate science, because traditional history just has not looked at object relational perspectives and how our upbringing, how that shapes us later on as adults in politics and in the other social views that we have. It's just not been done, so that is something new. Also, in particular, the theory of how money and economics are being used to shore up psychological defenses, and also the idea that wasn't economic catastrophes are equivalent, is in the sense that they are society-wide patterns of self-sabotage, which is a pattern that we see individually with depressive people, that very often when they're at the brink of success, they will do something that undermines them because they become afraid. Freud already talked about that thinking that people felt like frauds if they had been put down and they had success beyond their expectations. And something like that can also happen on a social, on a society-wide basis. Modern psychohistory has used the term of growth panic for the same pattern. And some of my own, some of the research I ran across, one was an article in Foreign Policy, which discussed the lack of success of anti-poverty programs, and their analysis was that when the poor got money, very often they used it more in a social context than, for instance, to immediately get more food, because our social needs and our need to feel like we belong into the group and are a member of good standing in the group, that is more profound than even immediate hunger. So again, it's a validation of the unique perspective that psychohistory has, which, yeah, that article was not did not come directly out of psychohistory, but it's a basis where those views can be condensed and then also compared and built upon. Another criticism was that psychohistory is cherry-picking data and trying too hard for validation. And at times, in some research, that criticism may have had some merit, but the counter-argument is also that psychohistory is a very young science, and we don't have a settled protocol and paradigm for research. So it's easier to get into speculation because we're interested. And some of the publications, especially early publications of psychohistory, were uneven. But from get-go, there were always some excellent studies. And so let's also not forget that similar reproaches have been made about psychoanalysis. And again, some people, some psychoanalysts would go beyond what the data really showed. But yet, if you look at people who have an excellent scientific background, like Mark Solms or Jane McGilchrist, we see that despite all those claims that psychoanalysis was not a science, if that was truly the case, it would not have attracted the quality people it has. And I think the same thing can be said for psychohistory, even though we don't have the big stars because we're a younger profession. I also believe that some of that criticism come from a problem with our popular idea of science, which was modeled on STEM science, where we look at systems that are not particularly sensitive to our intervention. And the social sciences, by and large, have tried to follow the model, but it gets tricky there because we're much more malleable than the chemistry or physics that the STEM sciences look at. And especially the more we deal with emotions, which are notoriously contagious, the old STEM model really does not apply, because very often the interactions drown out the major straight effects. But in my mind, that does not mean that the motive to try and understand and predict those patterns is not scientific. It's just that the technical challenges are bigger because we're dealing with a more fluid field, and it's hard to sort out what is what and what is causing the results we're getting. On the other, and it's also worth to consider that this criticism is not restricted to psychohistory. Even if you look at psychology, which is by comparison a much more established field. For instance, one of the standards in psychology has been the double-blind experiment, and that was found when before people did it, that they realized that when they had subjects in psychological research, people had an uncanny ability to get a hunch of what the experimenter was trying to prove, and then either try to help him prove it, or maybe also run counter. And that social sensitivity should have been really a very valid result, but it was relegated as because the researchers came from a very individualistic model, so that had to be driven out of the experiment because our theories demanded that we behave differently, which in retrospect we can say it was a major abuse of the science. We did not look at what was there to see, but what we wanted to see. And in a similar vein, for instance, Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which deals with physics. So it's a STEM field, but he also said that the theories very often are much more personality-based, and then also get defended or attacked by groups that are sold on a theory or another. So even in the most objective science, because it involves humans, the process is not all that scientific the way it is normally presented. So in a way, it goes the analysis that psychohistory makes, that what we do, our attitudes in a lot of things are based on our early experiences, especially as it relates to power dynamics. Indirectly, that is really validated with that. Now, the last criticism is that the history of childhood and child rearing practices is not one of a linear progress, and that has more merit because just like as children in our development, we know we can go forward and then we regress under more pressure. If that happens in individuals and families, why should it not happen in societies also? So that has more merit, but we can still make the argument that on the whole, with all the ups and downs, if you take a time frame from as long as we know about humans and about their history, that it seems that we've progressed from a more violent status to a more civilized one. One example, for instance, would be that now we have international standards of rights and what is just, even though it's still a big fight about people who are just trying to use their power to get what they want and don't look at the society as a whole. But given sometimes the unreliability of data and the fact that the data also, it's sort of like reading an EEG, where we get the data from that are based on different subsystems doing their own thing, and then we just get a composite, so which makes the interpretation of what we see very difficult. And I think also one thing that is a credit to psychohistory is that there have been a number of people who have really started initiatives in peacekeeping or reestablishing a consensus, helping people cope with the trauma, either from natural catastrophes or from war. And Vamit Volkan, who's has been a pioneer in that, and he was a psychiatrist, but he got into unofficial diplomacy. And because he was interested at first in individual dynamics, but then also shifted to large group dynamics. And I think that also gives a tie-in between psychohistory and modern psychoanalysis, because in both sciences, the interaction is very much focused. And if you look at the history of psychoanalysis, when Freud started with intrapsychic drives and intrapsychic structures, but then his successors, and even Freud already realized that a lot of times symptoms and problems occurred because of the interaction with other people. But the following generations really expanded on that. And it's interesting in that context that the schools of thought which were based of it, like object relations or attachment theory, are also the parts of psychoanalysis which have produced more research, and the research has also validated their approaches. And I think psychohistory also has some unique merits. One is that I believe it may rescue psychoanalysis. And what I mean is that around the Second World War and after, psychoanalysis was fashionable, but then afterwards it faded, and other approaches which seem to be quote unquote more scientific, which usually meant more regulated, were played up in research and also got more funding and stuff. And I think it's a real loss because the psychodynamic approach really has a richness, and because it's more dialectic than our traditional models of thinking, I think it's also much closer to the truth. One of the things that was very interesting for me was that I was reading about physics recently, which came out of my renewed interest in religion, and it was amazing sometimes reading about the interaction that physicists saw in small-scale systems. It was sometimes I had to do a double take and say, "What am I reading now? Physics or a psychodynamic interaction?" So I think we're actually tapping into a way of how things develop and evolve that is true across the board and on all different kinds of scales. But the way we're indoctrinated, the way we're trained to think, has not kept up with it. But if psychoanalysis fell by the wayside, we would lose all that knowledge, and we'd be the poorer for it. But one of the things that was a detriment to psychoanalysis, especially after World War II, was because so many psychoanalysts had to flee Germany since Hitler persecuted them. And when they came to the States, that soon went in the Cold War. But a number of analysts were also Marxist leaning, because dialectics, which is what Marxism is based on, is also more compatible with psychoanalytic thinking, because it's, you know, the phase of one event happening, then it flips over into its opposite, and then finally you end up with an integration. It's a paradigm that we're much more familiar with than with other systems. But yeah, because it had all that political overtones, of course, then that was also used against psychoanalysis and against the realization that they might actually have something. And because psychohistory is more overt, and because it's dealing more with public attitudes and statements and behavior, it's easier to be used for research, which can be validated by different people. I think it can help rehabilitate those methods of thinking. It's also interesting that even though psychoanalysis in some way was bedeviled and declared as not scientific and not valid, one part of it was applied very vehemently, and that's public relations. Does anybody know how that got started? I think it may be one thing where Freud is turning in his grave now, because it was his nephew. I forget the first name, the last name was Bernet. He went to the people. Oh, thank you. Elisa Mause just gave me the name. And he went to the Allies and basically advocated for that psychoanalysis provided information about the subconscious processes, and then it was taken up by business interests who were trying at that point to see if it could be used to encourage people to buy more or to become dissatisfied with things they already had. So as much as the therapy was denigrated officially, they were ready to use the results when it serves their interests. But I think also, especially given our present situation where we have an extreme polarization publicly, and also the really a loss of public consensus, and also lack of trust in public institutions, what psychohistory is trying to do, relating that to what is happening in families and then in communities, has acquired a tremendous importance. And that was also one of the reasons why I got into it, because I was upset that we are destroying our environment and walk into a catastrophe without paying the attention and doing something about it. It's really like an addiction. So I became interested in what keeps those forces in place. And I do believe that it's early models, how we see, how we interact with our caregivers, and then also how we are accepted, what roles we play has an impact. And unfortunately, at this point, families are really in a much tougher situation than we used to be, because parents have to be absent for a long time in order to work and keep the family together economically. And then when they're home, they're usually exhausted. And the problem is that both for children and for parents, the old form of learning, how to produce something for the family, has just fallen apart. So in a way, every family also competes with all the gadgets and machinery that they have and that is being pushed on them. And the underlying learning, which includes the factual learning about how to, let's say, bake bread or get food, and the social learning goes hand in hand. So even though we have more money and we have more things, we've also impoverished us. And it's become a big challenge. And I think psychohistory has the right perspective to work on that and try to improve it before we're really in a crisis. I mean, I don't think it's an accident that at this point, especially adolescents, seem to be more depressed and more isolated. And it's by and large, it seems we're trying to use more medication, but not much else, and that has to change. So, and I think psychohistory can help us propagate it and show the research what the connections are. And I think, in a way, that what we learn about relationships and especially about what we can or cannot do, how much power we have, really parallels our physical development. Just as we learn to move our bodies and move around, we learn how much things weigh, and if something is light or heavy, if we can push it around, or if we are going to get hurt if we try to move it. And in the same way, with experiences, it also shapes our image of what we can do socially. And unfortunately, from what I see, I think lately, the emphasis has been more on control and conforming, and not rocking the boat and being efficient, rather than on being experimenting, being social. And I think that to some extent that it makes people feel more isolated, and it robs them of having something useful to do, and then it creates despair and addictions and abuse, because we don't have a place to go to anymore. But it's I wanted to cite some evidence how our daily lives influence our attitudes, and it has to do with China. There are some areas in China which are based where people make their living by cultivating rice, which is a very difficult process. The rice plants need a lot of attention. Sometimes they have to be flooded, and other times the fields have to be dried. So doing it is a very communal process. And other areas in China are more given to wheat cultivation, which you plant it and then you wait till it's grown and you harvest it. And the interesting thing is that the areas of rice cultivation have a much more communal mindset, whereas the areas where wheat is grown are more individualistic. So and in a way, that's a little bit a Marxist idea, that what we do on an everyday basis, especially if it has to do with our economics, food is one of our major economic assets, that it shapes our self-understanding, and then also how we have this one model, and then we tend to replace it in different situations. It's like our body learns something, and then we'll try to use it in different contexts. At times, if we see that it really doesn't work, we may stop. But the tendency is to apply the same principles. And that gets a much more comprehensive look. Modern psychoanalysis of the different psychoanalytic schools of thoughts, I think, is closest to that approach, again because it's so much based on on interaction. And how interactions manage a relationship and either make it progressive and provide a frame for future growth, or inhibit that when the whole model becomes more hierarchical. And so I think that is a synergy that psychohistory and modern psychoanalysis really have. I also suspect, I know Dr. Lucas, in supervision with me, made a comment that when he was younger, I think he was more politically oriented, and he talked about being in Central Park and preaching to people, but then afterwards he gave it up because he realized he got his relief, but it didn't change people. So he turned to psychoanalysis in order to be more effective. And that wanting to change things really also goes is part of psychoanalysis from get-go. Freud quoted Virgil in the analysis of dreams. Sine qui movere superos a 40 movevo. If I can't move the elites, I'll move the underground. But if you look at the history of psychoanalysis, that was often squelched, but it's still there. And I've always loved the T-shirt we had where Freud's image was blended with Che Guevara and the legend "Join the Resistance." And by the way, I think that's also that's a good way if you want to know if a theory is valid. It's good to see if they have at least a trace of humor. If they're too stuck up, chances are they've become dogmatic and there's not too much happening anymore. I do want to talk a little bit about evolution, which to explain how we got there, and also that we really have disparate parts that we have to negotiate. And I think that's important for understanding growth and also the difficulties with it. And modern psychoanalysis and psychohistory, I think, share a focus, which is a crucial dilemma in our existence. We're individuals, we have individual bodies, but that's only a part of us, because we also know if you just take one person and they don't have any interactions, their self will shrivel and it may even die in the end. And sometimes people die physically if they have no interaction, if they're shunned or if they're kept too long in solitary confinement. But both sides want expression and want their needs to be taken care of. So we're in a position where we always have to negotiate, and no matter what we do, the other side is going to be hungry and is going to pull us in the opposite direction. And I'm comparing us to dogs because we're both a predator, but also a herd animal. And it's also interesting, one dog in itself is not particularly powerful or big, and dogs get their power from hunting in groups, and they're able, by working together, they're able to kill animals and feed off them that are much bigger and stronger than they are individually. And for instance, bears who could easily, a bear can kill a dog if they're alone, but bears are afraid of dogs because they know the dogs work together. And especially then for smaller bears, they can be truly dangerous. As primates, we started out largely to be herbivores, but we were already social. And in our early history, we became more predatory, and it helped us not so much by killing ourselves, but by becoming scavengers. And it helped us to get the nourishment that we needed for our brain development. But by the same token, we couldn't just be predators because we also needed our social cohesion and our group cohesion in order to be really successful. Hunt, by and large, was a group process. It wasn't solitary, but even more so because we need to learn so much. We're hypersocial, more social than any other animal. We need the group in order to live. And yet, we have to be able to balance both sides of ourselves. And one way how that balancing act is managed is with child rearing, where children learn the rules of the game and where they need to assert themselves and when they're overstepping the bounds. And it's interesting. I've always worked with people who have problems with addiction, and at one point I was studying a model which said that addiction is just or results when people don't have enough regularity, and it was explained by learning theories that if there's a random reinforcement schedule, which means that an animal does something, sometimes it gets rewarded, sometimes it doesn't, and there's very little predictability, that creates addiction. But I realized that that was only part of the story, because when I thought about it, I realized that most situations we have to deal with are really based on the same schedule. We don't always, our expectations aren't always met. And that then it dawned on me that the true task of relationships is not just to be persistent, even though that is very important, but also to know when we're truly in a bad deal and when it's okay, to leave and look for a better deal. And I think a lot of times when people get addicted, it's because they cannot leave. And that's, it's related with the depressive mechanism, not being able to imagine that there's a better way to exist, that you don't need the thing that makes you feel good for the moment, and then you have to pay through the nose. And I think both, again, modern psychoanalysis has a good understanding of that by promoting an accepting, equal kind of relationship. But psychohistory can explain the same dynamics on a social level. One way how we became so extremely social is that animals use body language in order to communicate, and we've intensified that to the point where it's also becoming something of an art form. For instance, either in dancing or also marching, when people move very much in synchrony, it seems to create a state that is associated with religion, and very often with, and I think it's based on partial identification, at least that the individual, the sense of individuality gets attenuated, and you merge with the group, and which provides an element of reassurance, and also sometimes for a while people can truly grow beyond themselves, become more altruistic, because they feel safe in the larger collective. And to I think a science like psychohistory is primed to study those phenomena, and to understand them, and how to use them benevolently, and also to notice what the dangers are if they're being abused in order to make people addicted to a cult, for instance. But because of that, I think also psychohistory can help us understand religions. And for a long time, I had accepted Freud's view of the future of an illusion, where he was very negative. But in the meantime, I had changed my mind. And I think there's more to it, because we are social, and we also interact with each other in a way that we are present, being social, both extends our sense of self and the sense of the group into the future, and provides a base that really goes beyond the individual. And I think that is something that we direly need to grow. Jung has written a lot about it, and I think he was way ahead of his time. And in a lot of his work, he describes the integration of his own individuality into a whole, and also a striving to become more whole and not stay fragmented, which is a goal, ultimate goal for maturity, both on an individual and a social process. Are there any other questions? I think.
I
Yeah.
popped a question in the chat. I was just curious about what the like the psychohistorical view might be of the development, fairly recent development of social media and that way of humans interacting, you know, in that way. If that's been talked about or studied at all.
I'm not aware of any specific study, but I think it certainly in group discussions it's come up a lot, and I think the consensus is that it's not a good thing, partly because you know, when we talk to each other, we know a lot of we have mechanisms which are to some extent also subconscious, to let us know if the other person is telling us the truth or if they're trying to manipulate us. But if you talk with somebody with a artificial something artificial in between, I think a lot of those mechanisms get sidetracked. So and it makes it harder to know really what is going on. I would also guess if somebody did a study of comparing what happens in personal interaction with people and what happens in Zoom meetings or you know, other similar media, that our ability to pick things up intuitively, that gets I wouldn't say completely wiped out, but at least diminished, and that not only negatively affects the immediate interaction, but it's also it robs us from an opportunity to practice.
Mm-hmm.
It's also interesting if recently I looked at some schools which had banned smartphones, and they found that even though the students complained initially, they very quickly settled down to not using the phones, and a lot of them also reported that they actually liked the non-mediated interaction better because it was more natural. And there was I ran across another study where somebody purposely took a long trip. He was walking, I forget now which area, but you know, he was just basically taking a hike for days and weeks and talking to people as he met them, more or less haphazardly on his walk, and doing that process. He said his experience of what the people were like that he talked with was very, very different from what's normally presented in the news. There you see people portrayed much more polarized, much more stringent, and well, in a way, more unified. I mean, we know as modern analysts that we all have all different bits and pieces to us, which work together to kind of come to a consensus. So we do something, but you know, the whole technique of joining is built on being able to use that and use the hidden majority or the hidden side to come to the fore. So it's we're not very unified at the best of times, and it's one of the things that makes us grow. And in personal interaction, that still comes out. But then if you get images which are more abstract, it gets lost. And with that, also, again, an opportunity to practice and also get the different sides out of other people.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a question, please?
Sure. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I remember reading Lloyd de Mause back in the 70s and being very impressed with his thinking. And I want to ask about some ideas and the extent to which psychohistorians are still in agreement about this. It seems to me that when psychoanalysis came out of Europe, and really Victorian Europe, that there was what people have said were Freud's pessimistic view. One could not really ever get better than some degree of neurotic. And that when this came to America, the emphasis became more on a kind of positive, forward-looking program, emphasis on the ego, less on the id or the superego. So just to read a little piece, and this is from his part on the evolution of childhood, and the evolution of child rearing practices. He's writing, rather than wars being terrible mistakes, you will discover them to be wishes. Rather than our progress beyond magic and superstition being due to the accumulation of knowledge, you will see it as an improvement in maturity due to the evolution of childhood. Rather than traditional man as secure and modern man as alienated, you will see why traditional man is far more likely to be schizoid and modern man to be happy and integrated. Rather than civilization being the ever greater renunciation of instinctual pleasure, you will come to view it as the ever greater satisfaction of needs. And rather than history as a victory for morality for the superego, you will discover why it is actually a victory of desire and reason, of the id and the ego over the superego. That's a big, big, big statement about the psychogenic origin of change in history and its connection to the evolution of childhood and child rearing practices. And I'm wondering what you think and what modern psychohistorians are taking of that view. Mause can be a very strong and persuasive writer, and where we are in the world of psychohistory now, 40 plus years, 50 plus years, I guess, since this book was written. Your thoughts, please.
Sure. I think that, well, I'm working with some psychohistoric, with some groups who work on psychohistorical issues, one specifically for the transgenerational transmission of trauma, and the other one which focuses more on religion. So I don't know if there is a complete consensus of psychohistorians. From what I know, I would say there's a rough consensus with a lot of quibbling, because like just like analysts, we like to argue. We have our opinions, but I would agree that the idea that accepting and validating child rearing makes children happier, and that trauma creates a lot of problems, which, especially for the group I'm working with, who has intergenerational transmission of trauma, that it can go over without intervention. It can go over generations. I think that's been validated. and the problem is always, getting down to the nitty-gritty and implementing it. But we can, if we're applying it, if we're applying those principles and or just try to do our best to be there for children without trying to take our anger out on them, we can see that they improve and they do become more creative. And
go ahead, please. Oh.
There's two bases. Children can be taught that they have to behave because out of fear of punishment. And unfortunately, I think Freud's idea of the superego still had an element of that. But in the meantime, both from some psychoanalytic schools of thought, also psychohistory, there have been other investigations that really looks at that what we want as children is be a member of the group and contribute to our families, contribute to our communities, and that if that is reinforced systematically, then it makes people happy. Recently, I came across a book on Mayan child rearing, hunter-gatherer parent. And when I discussed it in my group, I found out that most people seem to have read it and appreciated it. And the idea is also, and it was interesting because it also had a lot of parallels with how we would treat people in modern analysis, that children are very early engaged and asked to help the family, but always with the idea of how much they can do voluntarily. If a child says no, they're not being pushed. And even more importantly, then if the child tries to help, even if the product isn't perfect, the parent accepts it. And then, it's just with the idea that practice makes perfect. And
if I can speak to history one more time, the psychogenic theory of history and historical change is sometimes opposed by a more technological or economic view of history. History is driven by changes in economics. History is driven by changes in technology. And what's coming to my mind is the link is trauma. And when there was this earlier question about such matters as cell phones, are we also talking about trauma? The kinds of traumas that, whatever the evolution of childhood and the evolution of child rearing tactics, do we have another trauma that is the business, if you will, of families to deal with? And sometimes those traumas we don't deal very well with.
Right.
Witness wars, witness the Holocaust, or all the other traumas that are out there. For example, the economic traumas. Just live in Darfur. All of that there to be metabolized in the crucible of the family and in child rearing practices. I'm just trying to use maybe the idea of trauma as the bridge between this psychogenic emphasis on and individual maturation and the projections and the fantasies that are involved in group behavior and therefore history, putting it alongside this idea of trauma.
Well, even if it's not trauma in the sense of a dramatic trauma that completely overwhelms the person, I think that the economic effects can be very strong. What I'm thinking about is there was a study that showed that in societies that tolerate a lot of socioeconomic imbalance, which, one of the things that we know is that when people end up being marginalized and poor, especially if they can see that other people have a lot more, that it creates a lot of stress because it makes you feel that you're ready to drop out of the society altogether, and that's very scary. But so societies who tolerate a big differential in power and wealth, it also translates that children pick it up, and those societies who have the economic inequality then also have more problems with kids bullying each other. So in a way, we're very sophisticated that what seems to be just an economic consideration actually does translate to a social relationship. And if somebody can have more power economically, then it's also okay for me to have more power whichever way I can, and I can rub it into you and not let you have a moment's peace. So what happens economically is very important to look at, but in the sense also how it translates socially.
And I would think how it translates psychodynamically and psychoanalytically, because if you are hungry, you regress. You get to talk, I think, more about id than you talk about superego or even ego. The stress that's caused is by the psychological disruption that's occurring. And then the social ramifications of that psychological disruption. Those, I'm just responding to your, what you're saying here.
Well, stress happens, and especially chronic stress happens on all different levels. It's psychological, but it's also physical.
Oh, yeah.
Then more purely cognitive. If you're in dire straits now, but you also, in addition, you don't see any hope that things are going to improve soon, or that you can't expect to get help from other people if you try to ask them for help, then your stress is going to compound, and we know that just chemically. Hormones are aren't going to do your brain any favors. It makes it harder to think cogently and effectively. So yes, people will regress, and then it puts them behind the eight ball, because in the regress state, they won't be able to help themselves sufficient as easily as somebody else who's in a more relaxed state.
Yes, and as we know, psychological distress is a communicable disease.
Right.
I mean, so to speak.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's part of what happens in the intergenerational transmission of trauma, that the stress, the parents are trying, usually most parents don't try to take their stress out on their children. They're trying to contain it, but the children pick it up anyway, because just if we live with somebody, we get a sense of what their level of tension is, what makes them scared, And especially with attachment figures, somebody did a study of what happens with children who are not directly the victims of violence in the families, who just witness it. And it turned out that if it was somebody they cared for who was an attachment figure to them, then seeing that person traumatized and violated nearly had the same effects as if it had happened to them. So yeah, it has a massive effect.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to me to say it's psychogenic. Yes, in a way it is, but Freud made the distinction between the psyche, which was internal, and things on the outside. And I think that's also that maybe a development that psychohistory has helped, is to see that the boundaries between the outside and the inside are a little bit more fluid, because most of what happens gets negotiated by interaction. Unfortunately, the more trauma we've had, because of the excessive stimulation and the fear, then once we've absorbed that, it tends to stick more in our mind, and it is harder to get over it, because a part of us is always, well, what if it happens again? And that's why it takes a long working through to help the person get to a calm enough state where they can get the idea that there is an alternative, and then learn to hold on to it, even under periods of greater stress.
I think I saw Alba with her hand up earlier. I don't know if she still has a question or not.
Yes, I do. I'm just curious.
Hi, Alba.
Hi. So since, we're huge, repetition compulsion is part of our, the dynamics in our, relationship with our clients, or, how we work through certain, trauma. But given that, most of our leaders were born in the 50s, when all those traumatic events like World War II happened, the Holocaust happened. Is this a repetition compulsion? What's going on right now, like the destructive quality of leadership? Not just locally, but seems to be globally, like it's just hard to understand, So that I was just thinking so.
It's a very good observation. I don't know that anybody has looked at it. I think there could be a lot to it. Also, I believe some of the other factors are also that one thing that strikes me, having read about German history of leading up to World War II, and the gradual tendency of people who had been more moderate to then become scared and go for a strongman, and which ended up putting Hitler in power. And I think we can see somewhat of a replay of that, also because people are scared. But there's also an interesting theory in psychohistory, which may be able to shed some light on it. I think what we're also going through is more distrust in social institution, and especially in the fairness of social institution, which certainly, considering how even in the rich countries, in the industrialized countries, how people live and how much socioeconomic difference, inequality we tolerate, that's going to color people's expectations, and a feeling of lack of security. A state that has money for everything else but not for me. How much can I trust it? so I think, well, the theory is terror management theory. And what that means is that on a very basic level, we're all afraid. We know that we're going to die, but we try, most of us try not to think about it and have a hard time dealing with it. What has been proven or shown in research is that when something happens and people get reminded that they're mortal, they tend to become more selfish and also more conservative. And I think that is also something that we're going through, because we've done a lot of damage to other people, other countries, to nature, our biological survival system. And I think on the subconscious level, that does register and makes people more afraid. But instead of being able, then having the courage to unite and resolve it with concerted action, there's a very strong tendency to fight. And some people, special interests who feel that they are in a position of power, are not eager to share it, even though, from a rational point of view, it's evident that that's what it would take to resolve the problems. But they want to hold on to the individual, to their interests, to their power bases. And unfortunately, I think what we also can see is with the professionalization of politics, that both moneyed interests have more power. Yeah, it's become a lot more expensive to run a campaign nowadays than it used to be. And it's also, some countries are better off, like in Europe, they're very often, the whole campaign of, to get elected are shorter. So even if they wanted to spend money, they can spend it all very quick. So that dulls it down a little bit, but the whole trend still goes to having more hierarchy. And it's not exactly like going back to a feudal system where you had the king, and then the king's son or daughter would inherit power. But we have enough nepotism and influence of oligarchies to create at least a mixed picture of that. So I think all those things come together. And there may be at least in the US, I believe that most of the people who end up making it big in politics are people who belong to the elite. So personally, I don't think they had that much trauma during the wars, but they also learned that they had to retain the power of the family, even if that meant that they had to lie about things that they witnessed. If you read both Mary Trump's analysis of her uncle, but also I forget now, was a journalist. She had written a very good biography about Bush, the younger Bush. You can see a mix of psychopathic influences because that was how the family got the power in the first place, and that was also knows how to maintain it, and learning to tell a story and stick with it, even if the evidence wasn't really there. So I think that is more what we're dealing with. Which, it's a form of alienation. I don't know that it's traumatization in that stricter sense.
Thank you.
Well, I'm just reminded of what Plato was writing about in 400 BC when he was, speaking about the ideal society, and that the leader of that society would be a philosopher king. And that philosopher king would be, if you will, indoctrinated into that. That person's character would be shaped essentially from birth, that it would take a very special, and we might say psychologically mature person who would be put into the position of leader. In Plato's whatever, dreaming it up about what would be the best way of going about things, that was his prescription
Right.
for. I mean, because we're talking about leadership.
Right. And I know that different people tried it. Some kings spend a lot of resources trying to give their sons or daughters a good education. I think one of the things that was often hampered was that they did not know much about the subconscious, so they could not address it. And being a prince and the king to come was also a very unusual situation. So that in itself would have made it much more difficult to have a normal childhood and the kind of attachment figures that we ideally want to have. We can see it now with people who are successful and rich. Very often their children have difficulties because the parents are so busy being successful that they can't be around the children and be supportive and be laid back the way as would be ideal. Now, if the parents are understanding and at least allow the child to have allo parents, a reliable nanny, or then afterwards teachers, they can really step into what the parental role would be, then I think that it might be possible to mitigate it, but certainly not easy. And I think also that the people who end up becoming very successful by temperament are probably not the best to then do that and give up their power in their private lives when it works for them everywhere else. And it's interesting, a lot of the difficulties we have in our society, especially the beginning inequality, seems to have occurred with the advent of agriculture, which allowed us to produce more food. So in a way, it was an asset for society because we now could, not everybody had to be a farmer and generate their own food. We could feed other people who could specialize, whether it was in art, science, or medicine. But unfortunately, a lot of it was also that we developed warrior classes because if we had a stockpile of food, then somebody else could get the bright idea, well, I can't just take it. So we needed to protect it, and that created inequality. And then very, very soon the elites would also feel entitled to their share of the common food and then some. So historically, the people who actually produced the food, which were farmers, and I think also a lot of time women, were overrepresented instead of getting the status that they should have had. They were disregarded because they had the knowledge, but they didn't have that much power. That went more to the people who had the weapons. And we're still struggling with that today. I mean, it's so interesting in that context to see that the UN right at the moment seems to be getting a little bit more ambition to try and regulate the worst excesses that we're going through, and hopefully that's going to continue. And that would really be a major step to get away from nation states and truly become more collective.
So, Dorothea, you've kind of pulled a lot of strings here and there. I'm appreciating what you're saying in the way that you're pulling things together. You mentioned Mary Trump, and you've been talking in her analysis of Donald Trump, and I'm kind of drawing some parallels with the childhood intergenerational trauma.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and many years ago, I was reading Alice Miller's books, as she was talking about all this intergenerational trauma stuff. And one of her books touched on Stalin and Hitler, and looking at their experience of, well, in particular, Hitler's, with some of the child rearing practices that he went through and how that contributed to World War stuff. And today we have Trump, Mary Trump's book, and I just pulled some things up that in the newsletter from the International Psychohistory Association, there was a book on the dangerous case of Donald Trump, that people have been looking more at him. And it's interesting that today that he was judged as guilty on 34 counts, that we are taking Trump to trial in some unprecedented ways. So I'm kind of putting that there, and then we have the post-World War II trial of Nuremberg. So I'm just so I have those things floating around in my mind, and I wonder if you can pull them together a little bit better.
Well, thank God Trump may have some ideas which would make him another tyrant like Hitler, but he hasn't had the opportunity. Whereas, and I think one of the differences between Trump and Hitler was also that Hitler, in a way, was a better manager. He could create a lot of allies. Trump has tried to do that, but for him, it's much more personal. And I also think that the trauma was different. Hitler had a very abusive father, and even though originally he seems to have been also have some artistic talent, it was basically beaten into him that if you wanted to succeed, if you wanted to protect yourself, you had to be just ruthless in power. And his whole fantasy about the superiority of the Aryan race, I think, came from that. Never again, you're not going to beat me. Whereas Trump, I think the family trauma was that I think it was his grandfather. His father lost his father at an early age, and the mother was not. Even though they had some money, the mother wasn't good at holding it together. So at a very young age, Trump's father had to go in business with the mother because he wasn't old enough to legally be able to run a business. And he became very successful at it. But then, and there's some evidence that the grandfather also, even though he was successful, but he did it with somewhat shady means. So there was a streak of psychopathy in the family already there, which Trump's father continued. And then with his son, he basically raised him in a very psychopathic way, which was that the image was everything. you didn't need to actually produce something as long as you could make people, manipulate people and make them believe one thing or the other. You were okay, you could get away with it. Trump tried it, but he really doesn't have enough of a solid base to be able to pull it off. He could do it for a bit. And yeah, in that context, I think it's also interesting that starting with Kennedy, under the advent of TV, our presidents have become much more like actors, because that's what we want, that's what we can evaluate. And it was even with Kennedy, people heard him debate Nixon, and people who had listened to it on the radio felt that Nixon won. But people who had watched Kennedy on TV, because he was very photogenic, he felt that he had won, and that trend, that you had to be presentable and do it on TV and basically induce transferences. That has been a continuous stream, and Trump, by having been a TV personality, really fits that model. And Hitler didn't have it. To some extent, he didn't have the technology. Also with Goebbels, he exploited that, and also led people in a trance. And just like with Trump, he has his people who are really loyal to him, and who see him as a messianic figure. And those people were there in Germany, I think, even to a larger extent. But a lot of people also followed simply because they were afraid of what would happen to them if they spoke up. And that was the same thing in Stalinism. If you get somebody who's ruthless enough, and who is good at finding people who also who are willing to join them, then individual resistance and really becomes a difficult thing, because the people who have the power can use it to squash opposition and resistance when it's still more vulnerable. So there's both some similarities in terms of developing a cult and pursuing their agenda, but also differences that I think Hitler was still more vindictive, whereas Trump just wants to have personal power more, and he wants adulation. But it's also, there's a tremendous insecurity, because Trump's father, I think, suffered from losing his father early, who was a more competent person. But Trump then also suffered because when he was very young, his mother came close to death. She had a complication from the childbirth of the next child, and I think Trump was very attached to her, but then got scared, and I think that's the source of his compulsive womanizing. So there's a lot of trauma that then also has been exploited for both of them. Does that answer your question?
It broadens it, yeah. I was interested in the transference piece, but too, and their use of that. Didn't Roosevelt do some of that stuff with his fireside chats on the radio, getting this kindly father thing going?
In those days, if you want to be a politician, to some extent, you have to be a manipulator, because you have to get people on your side. But at the time, the technology was not that developed. So it wasn't that easy to pull off. And I think by and large, people also had somewhat more leisure and were not as distracted as they are nowadays. Which also, if somebody, for instance, I found it, I was doing telehealth for quite a bit, and I found that I would prefer to talk to people by phone because if I listened to their voice, I felt I could get a better idea about what was going on with them than if I looked at them via Zoom. In a way, I got more data, but it was harder to interpret. And I think, when Roosevelt did his fireside chat, he had a persona, but it's also that it's more difficult to stay completely on message. If you talk, especially if it's a long talk, then if you just have a quick appearance where everything is going on and you're talking and you're on TV and all. So I think with the increased technology, we're overwhelming ourselves, and it's harder to come to a sound intuitive judgment.
I saw Bill waving his fingers.
Thank you. Hi, Doris.
Hi.
I believe that psychohistory is most important for us as analysts and students, but I really worry in today's culture whether or not psychohistory is more negative, because there's so much negativity about psychoanalysis. And I mean, you initially in the beginning talked about Edward Bernays and what he did, but eventually he was branded a fraud and a con, and everybody kind of just pushed all that aside. And now, another name that you mentioned was Mark Solms, who I thought I'm in awe of his work in integrating neuroscience with psychoanalysis. But then I heard that he revised the standard edition, and without even reading it, I thought, now this is heresy that somebody would revise the standard edition. And I don't know if anybody here has actually purchased it for $1,500 or whatever it costs. But I've been thinking, I wonder if he's not trying today to minimize psychohistory and bring a new color or flavor to psychoanalysis that may be more open for a contemporary society. I'm wondering what you think about that.
I hadn't heard that he revised some of the writings of Freud. In a lot of ways, it seems that he was agreeing with a lot of Freud's ideas. And I think, just like Freud said, I'm not a Freudist. Moi, je ne suis pas Freudiste. It's dangerous if we stick with any theory as a dogma, because then we're really doing religion, we're not doing science anymore. And in the same way, I would say some of the psychohistorical ideas, I think were wish fulfillment and they have not panned out. But the basic idea that our child rearing shapes us and shapes us in areas that we may not know the connection to, I think that is sound. And the last thing I saw of Mark Solms was he did a video about play where he emphasized the importance of it, and also said, amongst other things, that it was it taught rules about power, because play tends to be hierarchical, but even the person who is on top of the hierarchy only has so much leeway, because if they become too dictatorial, then it's no fun for the other people who are playing. So I think that would be a model that would be consistent also with psychohistory about what good object relations look like. Yeah, you don't have to have an absolute equilibrium, but you have to look at all your stakeholders in a situation and make sure everybody gets taken care of in order for the whole system to prosper. By the way, it's interesting. I remember years ago reading a book which was really dealing with economics, and they said the businesses that were careful to make sure that the needs of all the different stakeholders were satisfied, they were the businesses who maintained themselves the longest, which makes, from an object relations point of view, makes a lot of sense. So I don't know that I'm familiar enough with Solms to be able to say what he's up to, besides making money if he has to pay him.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. But it's also interesting that Freud's ideas in a lot of ways have been validated by neuropsychology. And it also it shows how our cognition and the emotional sides of our brain are really really integrated. And traditionally we've had theories that kind of pitch them against each other, including with the Enlightenment, that emotions were considered just to be prejudice, and it was only reason which was supposed to save us. But now, if you really want to make good decisions, you have to be able to use both. And it's interesting. I think Jane McGilchrist goes even further than Solms in explaining how both both the hemispheres interact and are necessary for each other in order to come out with the best results in adjustment. And in a way, that's a different version of what I've been trying to get across, that we have different parts to ourselves, different sides to our nature, and we have to keep a balance where we take both into account and let them be, and then try to integrate them. If we don't, then we lose our edge. And in a way, I think even psychohistory just talks about how in child rearing we can't indoctrinate the children. We have to let their own experience develop and just support it. The more we try to follow an ideal, in a way, the more we interfere with free thinking. And if you look at all the major cultures who very often had very strict systems of what people were supposed to think, then in the end, in order to get wisdom, people had to untrain themselves from that. That's where you get not the Western Enlightenment, which is too much based on reason, but the Eastern forms of Enlightenment, which is really getting back to your creativity and undoing some of the overwhelming power of what you have been culturally indoctrinated in.
I'm mindful of the time, and I'm wondering if you have some final thoughts that you might want to share with us.
I wanted to recommend a book which is not directly either psychoanalytic or psychohistorical, but it's called Outliers, and I think it's a nice study because it talks about how people. It describes the pattern that it talks about how people who seem to be outstanding and head and shoulders above others, how they got to be that way, and that they had small opportunities where they could practice. You know, they usually had some opportunities where they got an asset that put them ahead of other people, and then with that small advantage in practice, they were able to build on that and make it really bigger. And I think that's so that it's, even though it does not have directly to do with object relations, it's easily applicable to that. And it just shows how once you have an advantage, chances are you get more opportunities, and then also because you're doing better at it, it'll build on itself. So, and I think in that way, the development is very similar to psychohistory, which also looks over the intergenerational patterns of what happens to us. And it's important then to also to be aware that if we're successful, we have a tendency to take credit for that. Yeah, we're so big, we're so strong, we're so smart. But chances are a lot of it was luck. And to be able to keep that modesty, I think is very, very important for future growth, and not to let your good luck go to your head and then start to mistreat other people, or abuse your power in some way.
Well, thank you so much for being with us this evening, and it was a very fascinating discussion, and you covered a lot of territory and given us a lot to think about. I hope it was an enjoyable experience for you as well.
Yeah,
good.
It was.
What was that?
It was very good to see people I had not seen in a long time.
That's right. Well, we'll close our presentation for the evening. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to remind you that the recording of this presentation should be available within the next 24 hours. There'll be a notice that will come out, and it'll also be accessible on our website and on our YouTube channel. Please be on the lookout for our fall registration, which should open next week. And Dr. Elisa Miles, who was on the call with us before, is planning on giving a presentation in the fall on the work of Alice Miller. So please be on the lookout for that as well. With that, I wish you a good evening.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Doris.